playground fireside chat session on charge two-wheeling into the future of e-mobility. I'd like to invite our moderator, David Goday, Managing Director of Jungle Ventures, and joining him is Son Nguyen, founder and CEO of Dat Bike. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Everybody hear me? Not on mute? How good is it being together again here in KL for Wall Digital? So hats off to Patrick and the Ketcha team. Fantastic founder. I think it's going to be a great fireside chat. And in the spirit of everybody coming together and kind of sharing and learning, Son is going to take some questions. So I'll leave about 5 minutes at the end. There's 2 microphones. And so if you have any questions at the end, as we're going to go through, then we'll get to those. But it's a really interesting company. If you think about Vietnam, which is where the company's based, 65 million motorbikes in Vietnam. So that's 1 per person for everybody, the entire population over the age of 15. So 2 out of 3. If you think about Indonesia, there's another 100 million. Thailand has 20 million. That's not even mentioning Philippines, Malaysia, the rest of the markets. So every year, 13 million motorbikes are sold in Southeast Asia, $25 billion market. It's an enormous opportunity. But before we get into that, would love to learn maybe a little bit more about you, your journey. You, I think, originally started out in software. So I'll pass the mic over for an intro.
Can everybody hear me? Cool. Yeah, so like David said, my background was in software, starting from when I was very young. So I should have come here, 3 years ago when I was still living in the digital world. But now I'm making electric motorbikes. So I started programming when I was in middle school, and then continued to high school, participated in a lot of competitions, representing Vietnam in some of the competitions, and won some prizes. So the Vietnamese government actually sponsored my scholarship to the US, where I studied computer science, of course. And then afterward, I moved to Silicon Valley to work in software as an engineer. And then after a few years, I decided to quit to be electric motorbikes for Southeast Asia.
And why Dat Bike? Why build EV motorbikes?
It's like a very personal reason for me, because before Dat Bike, I was spending 15 years in software, and while software is like a very powerful tool that I had, I thought that I was limited by this tool, because I know software, so I was just trying to find software problems to solve, but then there are a bunch of other problems in the world that don't necessarily start with software. For example, the air pollution problem in cities in South Asia, and this problem is actually a lot more relevant to me, or to the people I know, instead of building financial management software for wealth managers, right? So I decided to quit and stay in Silicon Valley, actually, to learn how to be, electric motorbikes, going from machining to electrical design and all that. Build a bunch of prototypes before I packed up and moved back to Vietnam to start Dat Bike. Yeah.
But in the EV space, there's a huge amount of R&D that's happening in China, happening in the US. How does Southeast Asia differ? How do we keep up? Or how are you able to leverage some of what's going on around the world?
Yes, obviously, in the West, people are more focused on cars, so on four-wheelers. And then, you often see that, there are two-wheelers, EV companies in the West, but they often come and go because there's no real market. In the West, you actually, when you do an EV, you have to actually do 2 things. First, that you have to educate people, about the EV, and second, you have to educate people about moving away from cars. And these are the 2 hard problems, and you don't want to solve 2 of them at once, right? Whereas the real market for two-wheelers is, in Southeast Asia, there are 250 million people, using gasoline motorbikes every day. The difference here, let's first talk about the common thing about these 2 problems, the car problem and then the motorbike problem. Essentially, in order to move people away from gasoline and to electric, what you have to do is to build a very compelling, high-performance EV that is also like affordable. And this is like, we believe that this is key. I mean, it doesn't matter if you solve the car problem or if you solve like the motorbike problem, you have to actually make very compelling high-performance product and sell it as a very affordable price. And then there are because like motorbikes are a lot smaller and they're a lot more efficient in terms of like energy usage. So there's like a bunch of Nguyen's differences going into building a motorbike. There's like way too many things for me to list out, but I would say that it is possible to build with the current state of technologies, it is possible to build an electric motorbike that is that rivals gasoline motorbikes in power and range, in performance, but also like only slightly higher in terms of price. And I know it because we've done it, right? And I mean, another thing that I want to point out is that it is actually a lot easier, a lot cheaper to start building electric two-wheelers compared to cars. So we, at Dat Bike, we started shipping the first batch of bikes to our customers within 15 months after we incorporated the company. So after we started, and with less than $1 million in capital raised, and this is like impossible with car.
Yeah, that's amazing. And from a consumer perspective, do you think it's the environmental aspect that is resonating with consumers, or is it the total cost of ownership? Because obviously the benefit of this is that there's no petrol, there's no maintenance cost that's ongoing. And so as you think about not just the upfront cost, but then the total cost of owning the vehicle, is it that angle? Or do you think it's the environmental friendly angle that's resonating?
Yeah, I could actually answer this question very well because we did a survey very recently with all of our customers, and about 0% of them pick the environment factor, right? So, I mean, like more than 50% of our customer bought the bike because it's a lot cheaper to use. So, the operational cost is about 15 times compared to a gasoline motorbike. So essentially, you would like get the electric motorbike for free after 5 years of like usage. And for a bike that can last more than 10 years is like a very good deal. But I mean, I understand that our current customer are like a very small set, so I'm not sure if they would be the representative of all the people in South Asia, but I believe, and we as we at Dat Bike, we believe that over a very long term, essentially the problem comes down to how to, reduce the gap between gasoline and electric. Currently, the gap is like pretty big, right? And by the gap, it really means like performance versus price ratio. If we can reduce this gap, then like more people would switch into electric, because my theory is that if we, given like a choice between a gasoline bike and an electric bike, if like all the dimensions, all the metrics are the same between the two, things like power, range, pricing, refuel, time, design, utility features, if all of these are the same and one is running on electric and one is running on gasoline, then people, like everybody would pick electric. So it's our, job to like reduce the gap here.
Yeah, and clearly the market opportunity is huge. I think one of the other gaps is really the charging infrastructure that's in place. And I think that's true for cars and it's true for bikes. What's the state of Vietnam, and how have you thought about that from a product perspective?
Yes, I can see the 15 minutes left banner in the back, but yeah. So this is like one of these like nuance differences that I mentioned earlier, because to charge a motorbike is a lot more efficient than doing that on a car. So you put a lot less stress on the grid. So there's if you charge like hundreds of motorbikes at the same time in an apartment, the electricity there wouldn't go down. So that's the first thing. The second thing is like, another example is that so a normal home outlet in Southeast Asia can do 3 hours for 200 kilometers of like charging a motorbike, and this is like extremely, more efficient than charging a car, because like for a car you would like normally you would have to have special equipment or like a separate dedicated power line in order to like charge it for 200 kilometers in 3 hours. But we at Dat Bike actually pushed this even like further. So we just launched the first very fast charging station, DC charging for two-wheelers in all South Asia is located in District 3 of Ho Chi Minh City. So you can go there and charge for 20 minutes, and you can go for 100 kilometers. And this is like unheard of in the industry up to now. Yeah.
Got it. And most consumers, are they charging at home then? They're just plugging the bike into a regular socket?
Yes, most of our customers charge at home by just like a standard wallet, and it can do 3 hours for 200 kilometers. And the average person in South Asia travel about 28 kilometers a day. So it's actually, they can like do 3 hours and they can go for like a whole week.
Yeah. And then with EVs, one of the other powerful things is the software that sits behind it. So if you think about Tesla, Tesla can customize the driving experience based upon the driver who's sitting behind the wheel. Given your background in software, how have you thought about, software and the element side to the bike?
Yes, for sure. So we do things like, bike control and over-the-air updates. So like I can sit here and press a button, and then we push our software to update all the bikes running on the street now. And then at the same time, we have the app for people to change how they want the bikes to perform. But it's like more important than that. I think what the real power of software is in like data collections that makes you become stronger as day go by. Because we collect data on like how people use the bikes and how it performs in various conditions, and this kind of data go back to us to help us like do all this like optimization and tuning, even like guide our like product direction in the future. So this is like a very powerful tool. It's very similar to how like Google established a monopoly in search, or like Tesla, just doing very well with like how much data they have collected over these like self-driving system, right? But I mean, if you go like another layer deeper, then I would think that my experience in software shaped the way I think about how to be a better product. So we value a lot on the things like faster iteration speed and like very short feedback loop. Right? So we build a company that does like R&D and that's running its own manufacturing facility and has its own D2C like channels. So this is very different from the market leader, which is like Honda. Of course, they do R&D in Japan, and then they manufacture in Vietnam. And obviously, when they want to sell to Indonesia, then they manufacture in Indonesia, and then they have like the dealership network to help they sell the product. And as a result, Honda usually take 5 years for their like product development cycle, from the initial prototype to actually shipping the product. For us, it takes about like 1 year. So we are like essentially a 3 years old company that is about to release its fourth products. So like while they're still doing their like in-house development and testing, we have released multiple versions to the customer to actually have like a actual result. And this is like the way I believe this is like the best way to build products.
Yeah, the direct consumer contact creates that shorter feedback loop, which I think becomes very powerful. And 0 to 50 kilometers an hour, what's the time?
It's 3 seconds.
3 seconds. Have you gotten feedback that it's too fast?
Yes, we actually did. So this is like way too much faster than a normal gasoline bike on the street. So we've gone from our first version to our second version, like tuning it down a little bit of the first acceleration. But people obviously can change it on the app. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously at this conference, we've heard a lot about the ecosystems in Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia. But how's Vietnam? How's the Vietnamese ecosystem, both from a capital perspective, a regulatory perspective, different aspects?
Yeah, so like first talk about the market. I think Vietnam is like a very good entry point to build EV because of two things. First is that it has the highest motorbike per capita in the world. Like I said, like pretty much every household owns a motorbike. And then at the same time, we have the highest penetration of electric in all South Asia at about like 3%. It's still very early, but it's like a decent market of around 500,000 units per year already. So as opposed to like countries like Indonesia, Thailand, or the Philippines, they are still very early in the EV journey. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the Vietnamese government actually they haven't published a bunch of like policy to support EV, but they did make a decision to go all into EV by 2040. So they would ban all gasoline motorbikes by 2040. So I would imagine that in the next year or two, a bunch of like concrete policy would come, and we as the company want to grow very fast so to catch this wind. It's unlike Indonesia now, because Indonesia, I think it's like there's a bunch of policies, but the market is like way too early, so there's going to be like a lot more people jumping. It's like pretty crowded now. I think that it's like pretty hard to enter the market in Indonesia at the moment. But more importantly, I think Vietnam has a very strong like manufacturing expertise. So of a typical gasoline motorbikes on the street in Vietnam, 98% of the parts are made within the country. So in terms of like traditional motorcycle manufacturing and its supply chain, Vietnam is actually very strong. But at the same time, like Samsung and Apple's like make like phones here in the country. So we have a newly developed expertise in manufacturing and engineering of like electronic parts. I think in fact Samsung make like most of their phones from Vietnam. So we hire a lot of people from Samsung actually.
Yeah, and I do want to open it up to questions. I'm not sure if anybody has one now. Yep. Yeah, I'll repeat it just so everybody here. So VinFast is a manufacturer in Vietnam. And how do you differentiate against what they're doing both in the automobile and the bike space?
Okay, so I would talk from like a fundamental level first. I think I just focus more on e-bikes than them. So two things, like if you go to like a VinFast like showroom, you will see that there are three big cars that take like all the space, and then there's like one motorbike in the corner. Even though I think they have 5 models already. And then if you work at VinFast scooter division and you perform very well, you would get promoted to the car division. So the focus is not there. I mean, it's good that they have a presence, that would help like pushing for like market education and like government like policies. I just don't think they have the right focus, right? And as a result, we currently at 0 economies of scale have better price versus performance ratio than them. I think it's like about 2 times better. So for like a given price, if you buy a Dat Bike, you get 2 times the range, or like the rate of charging. So we obviously have a lot more room to grow. Yeah.
And just on that too, if you think about the motorbike space, you think about Ducati or you think about Harley Davidson, brands that have built up very strong communities. And a lot of those has happened at a grassroots kind of level. Are you starting to see any of that develop around your brand, or?
Yes, so community is one of our, go-to-market strategy. So we build a community from like very early stage of company. And in the past year, after we released our like second iteration of the product, it's gone like 20 times more fans and more users. And then people spin out to do their own like smaller community of Dat Bike users for regional differences, for different regions, and all that, right? And we go like directly to consumers, so like going through community is like a very important factor for us, for sure. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Question? So just for everyone's benefit, the question was, where are the opportunities for differentiation since a motorbike is a motorbike?
Yeah, so I mean, cars are the same to me, so I imagine that motorbikes are the same to you. But I think it's like the motorbike, so like I can give you some example to illustrate better. So motorbikes in China, for example, the whole market, because like no one owns a driver's license to use like motorbikes, so the market tend to prefer bikes that are slower, so like 50 kilometers per hour. So it's like faster doesn't necessarily mean like better. It's like in China, people want bikes that are like slower, shorter range, and carry like a person for like delivery purposes. For example, right? In South Asia, people prefer bikes that they can carry like sometimes three people at the same time and going for like a very long distance. And then like the charging time is also like need to be like very, very fast because just like because people travel like for longer distance. I think in terms of like design, I would say that bikes in Vietnam, Indonesia are like very similar, but people in India would prefer like motorcycle looking, like manlier bikes, for example. But eventually, like all like these things, I personally believe that things like design, utility factors, and all of that are like secondary. It's very important that we have to make bikes that have like higher performance and lower cost. And this is like actually like a really hard problem. This is like essentially like all the car companies trying to solve as well, right? And no one is really doing that at like a perfect level that yet. So it's like a race to like perfection, and so like the differentiation here to me is more like the direction and the speed that you pick to race, as opposed to like the final product. Does that make sense? Sorry.
Sorry.
Yes, and
one last question.
Okay, so I think there's like a very important idea here that you just mentioned. Like eventually, like everything become a commodity, right? Like as the bike get like high, like good enough performance, and then we try to make it like cheaper and cheaper. Eventually, everything will be a commodity. I mean, I actually agree with that. And I think I'm a VC, I would invest in a company that can pivot very fast. So it's better and move very fast and pivot very fast. So if, it's like Apple, right? They have like huge scale, but then once the phones become commodity, they switch into like services. And even at that scale, they were able to switch like very fast, and which is why they're like so successful.
Okay, I need to ask you one question. Let's say it's one, are you still looking for investment?
Always. That's
good, we should talk later. Second, are you expanding? Do you want to go outside of your Vietnamese market?
Yes, for sure. It's not a matter of ambition for us. Like I always talk about like South Asia. I came back to Vietnam, and all of my teams, we study overseas, we work overseas, and we came back to Vietnam not to solve the Vietnam problem, right? We want to solve this problem for all South Asia. It's not a matter of ambition, it's a matter of, like you said, capital, and like the right focus at the right moment.
Then I think you came to the right place and met the right guy. Okay, look for me outside there. My name is Dr. Wee. We have a lot in common, just so you don't know me yet, okay? Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Unfortunately, the time's up. maybe we'll meet you outside
Sure.
and you can ask the question there. But thank you, Son. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everyone coming. Enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you for such a fantastic session, James and Man Kintran. Next up, we will. Sorry, that's David.